All right. Hello and welcome. This is going to be a video response to someone who left a comment on Flat Earth Banjo's latest video. A link in the description will be provided to the video. You can check it out. Here's the comment from Alpha Beta. A friend of mine doesn't believe in Flat Earth because you always see the same side of the moon no matter where you are. What is your response? I told him I'd make a video on it and he could show his friend. And he requested that the video be in response to Professor Dave's video destroying the flat earth without using science, part 1, the moon. So he wants me to specifically address this Professor Dave video. I got the video pulled up. We're going to go over that and see, just hear what Professor Dave has to say about the moon.
Hey everyone, so you may remember the 10 challenges I offered to flat earthers a couple of months ago, and it's been very amusing watching them run around like chickens with their heads cut off, making pathetic response videos where they puff up their chests and bark at each other for hours without actually responding to any of the challenges. Memorizing the names of logical fallacies and shouting them at random sure seems like a lot of fun, but it's not a working map or.
All right. So right away, he starts off by addressing the points that were made against him. And as we go through this video, you'll see why he's against people calling out logic fallacies. Because when you're engaged in a discussion or a debate with somebody, and you're trying to prove your point and you're using, arguments and stuff, it's important to know if you're using arguments that are circular in reasoning or, are fallacious in some way. Are they presupposing something and then reaffirming it? That sort of thing. Are you just talking in riddles, or are you making coherent arguments that that can be backed up? And you could talk about that specific point. You could address it, right? So what this guy does, and we'll go through this video, is he does a lot of straw man fallacies, and and that's pretty much all he does. He sets up an argument. He argues with figments of his imagination, and then dunks on it and then attributes that to flat earthers. And people that don't know the subject matter don't really know any better. So they think, oh, yeah, this makes sense. It all checks out. So I'm going to give you some other, the other perspective of the argument as we go through what he says.
Or a model that shows the seasons with night and day, or a legitimate response to anything whatsoever. So at this point, I think it's safe to say that they've thrown in the towel. Of course, there is no need to follow up.
So instead of making a video following up, addressing actual points and arguments, because the biggest critiques of his videos are that he strawmans and, makes logic fallacies to argue. Um, you think he would make a video doing better? No, no.
After such an annihilation, and I did not intend to, but now I find myself quarantined because of the coronavirus with no access to YouTube studios and no way to make my regular content. So, you lucky little flurf balls, I'm back for more. Here's what's gonna happen now. Since my 10 challenges made your heads explode, and none of you have the mental capacity to make a map or a model, even at a middle school level,
Dude, just think of the way he's talking to us because we disagree on the shape of the earth. And the arguments he uses are so weak and just like ridiculous, which we'll see. You would think that he would talking to us like this, he would have some real hard hitting, proofs here.
I figured I would dumb it down for you even more. It's very easy to think of things that single-handedly obliterate the flat earth delusion, like, say, the existence of gravity, but you are so thoroughly science illiterate that you just shout, gravity doesn't exist, and pretend that this is not a stupid thing to say.
So this is another example of how he sets up a straw man argument and then dunks on it and then gives the false, gives this illusion of victory over a flat earther or something, right? So nobody says that gravity doesn't exist. Nobody says that when you drop something, it's not going to fall towards the ground, right? Where the point of contention is that quote unquote, you guys, the globe Earth perspective of it is that when something falls, it's because it's attracted to the mass of the Earth, and it's actually falling towards the center of the Earth, right? That's what they say gravity is. And then there's also the space time version of gravity where they say that the mass of the Earth is bending and warping space time around it, and it's giving the illusion of gravity because it's creating like a pseudo force or something like that. They say, um, but keep in mind in the relativistic manner, it wouldn't even be a force because it's uh it's the effect of space time warping. Like it's all very convoluted. But anyway, uh he makes this straw man, right? So we have some people in some people in flat earth camps think that just buoyancy and density sorts out why things fall, and that's not and it doesn't have to do with mass attracting mass. And people in other flat earth camps think that there's a static electric component to it that gives a downward bias. And if you want to learn more about the static electric component real quick, we can do corona motor. This guy, talk about it real
Physics.
quick.
A section called
We'll see what this guy has to say about it. He pulls out a book called Lectures on Physics.
is adapted from Nobel Prize winning physicist Richard Feynman's lecture on physics, a section called Electricity in the Atmosphere. For every meter you go up in the air, the voltage increases by around 100 volts, or we could say around 100 volts per yard. We can draw these voltage increases using what are called equipotential lines. Notice that the ground is negative and the sky is positive with respect to each other. According to Feynman, this extends upward to 50 kilometers, or 31 miles, where the air is very conductive. This is the case in fair weather. In stormy weather, like a thunderstorm, things are quite different, and I won't talk about that here. But if this voltage exists between your head and the ground, why don't you get a shock? The reason is that your body is a good enough electrical conductor that standing on the ground, you're basically a part of the
All right, so you got this scaling static electric gradient, right? And the Earth's negatively charged, so this would create like a downward bias, right? To all matter that has charge potential, and everything has a charge potential. So, you know, there's something that's measurable and real that you can experiment with, and actually you can if you change something's charge potential, you can make it levitate, right? So with a Van de Graaff generator, you can make, like foil and shit levitate. So uh that the idea that we say that gravity doesn't exist, I mean, and then things fall, ha ha, he got us. Like this is classic straw man arguments from him.
So instead, let's try some proofs that have nothing to do with science at all. There is no challenge, there is no prerequisite information. You just have to listen, acknowledge that the logic is airtight, and then cry yourself to sleep. Are you ready?
So all I have to do is agree with his points, and then I won't be able to refute his points if I agree with them. That his logic's airtight.
Ready? Here comes one now. What is this object?
Now, what if he, let's say, for example, that he strawmans every argument and says things that nobody in the flat Earth community claims? Like, do I still have to agree with him?
It's the moon. We've all seen the moon. We've seen it many times. Look at all of these pictures of the moon. What do they have in common? They all show precisely the same features. We all see the same face of the moon. It doesn't change from night to night, and it doesn't change throughout the night. There is no denying this. You can't shout CGI. You can't cry conspiracy. It's the moon. We can all see it with our own eyeballs. It's there, and it always looks like this. Now let's place the moon above a flat disk and let it float around in the little magic circles you like to imagine. If the Earth was flat, would
What is he talking about? That it floats around in magic circles, dude. Does he not know that the sun and moon spiral between the tropics? Is it like what is he What's he even saying, dude? And then so he says, "Well, we all see the same face of the moon on a flat disk with a spherical object." Well, would you see the same on a spherical object? And the answer is no, because if you have people with different perspectives, right, the curvature of the moon is going to block off certain, it's going to block your your ability to see certain angles of it, and it's also going to reflect differently based on your position. So you're not going to see it look exactly the same the way that everyone does. The moon is something entirely different. We don't claim that it's a physical object, right? As far as we could tell, it's a light in the sky, some sort of projection, and it goes through cycles, and it's the same size as the sun, as you'll see during an eclipse. They're like two machine cut quarters. So that's all we can really say about them, is that the sun and the moon appear to be the same size in the sky, and the moon, gives off its own light. That's all we can say about it. So when he's talking about, oh, let's put a 3D spherical moon over a flat disk, nobody says that. We don't know what he's talking about, dude. So this argument isn't our argument. This is a construct in his head that he's, talking about so he can defeat it and make it seem like he's humiliating us because we're so stupid we don't realize this. But this isn't what we're saying.
We all see the same.
And this is why, at the beginning of the video, he talks about, oh, you guys are stupid for calling out logic fallacies. Well, yeah, dude, you're talking, you're you're the model of what you think we think is in your head, dude.
Same face of the moon? Here is someone standing in one spot looking at the moon. They see this. Here is someone standing in another spot looking at the same moon. They see this too. And this person, and this person. You get the idea. So, is this possible? No, because that's not how objects work. People on the opposite sides of an object can't see the same face of the
Yeah, touche, man. Good point. But we do see it all the same.
object. Go get two of your little buddies and have them stand on opposite sides.
For the moon, we do see it like that, though. See, this is the crazy part, right? So he's going to give this example here about how this guy can't see this person's head facing this direction, but we do see the moon, and like this person would be seeing the front of this person's face, you know. But he misrepresents it so that he can say it like this to make it
Can
seem
they
like
both
we're
see the
retarded.
front of your face at once? No. A spherical moon over a flat Earth is not consistent with reality at all. So, is it two-dimensional with the same face on both sides? Then anyone but these two people would see a different shape. So, no. Is it pointing down like a spotlight? Then it would change shape as it passes.
So again, he's just creating more scenarios for him to, dunk on that nobody says it works that way.
By and only appear circular when directly overhead. So, no. Is there any way we can make this work on a flat Earth? No. There.
No, like again, now he just makes this claim that it couldn't possibly ever work. Well, if the moon was its own, light projection, like, we don't know what the moon is, man. We can't go up there and touch it, you know.
Is not. So how, pray tell, do all people see the same face of the moon? Because Earth is a sphere and the moon goes around the Earth. It is tidally locked with the Earth, with one face always pointing towards the Earth. That's why everyone sees the same face of the moon, and that's the only way that everyone can see the same face of the moon. And guess what? The direct.
Okay, before we get into this right here, let's go back to, oh, you can't cry about CGI, right? Remember he said, um, can't cry about CGI because it's just the moon. You can see it with your eyes, blah, 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 right? He then goes on to show us CGI, right? So these things are taken from the quote unquote Discover satellite, right? And I have a video where I collaborated with I Can Science That, and we'll talk about him a little later on in the video. He actually found the raw, where you could download the raw data, and he figured out how to compile it and all that. And he has it listed here on a Google Drive. So if you want to check out the raw images from the Discover satellite, They're compiled here. You can download them, check them out. So here's one such image. Now you can take this image and run it through, one of those websites that'll tell you about the metadata for the images and stuff, and nothing comes back on these. Okay, so you don't know. There's no way to know anything about it, right? So to say that it 100% comes from a satellite and this is a solid image, picture, blah, blah, blah. No, you can't get the same kind of information out of it that you can from an actual picture. And this is from the highest, rawest form. If you watch the video or whatever and go through uh, where we got it and all that, like it doesn't get any rawer than that. That's publicly available, and you can't get any discernible information from it. So when he talks about you can't cry about CGI, well, then he then presents CGI, right?
the moon, and that's the only way that everyone can see the same
In this face of the moon, they say, so let me see, far side of the moon. So they say that this image was like the first image snapped by, a satellite or whatever, capturing the far side of the moon. So then they've just modeled this out and kept it going. And they say that the consistency of this is proof that the moon is a spherical object and stuff. It's retarded. That's objectively not proof of anything. If they were faking an image and then they just kept modeling it after the thing they faked and said that it was proof, then that wouldn't be proof, right? Now, there's a documentary called American Moon, and I'll link you that in the description. I can't show any clips from it because they're strict with the copyright on that. But anyway, they show the relevant parts are NASA Simulator, and Moon Simulator. You'll see how they 3D modeled the moon and made all these things and added the far side and stuff to it. Before anyone had even ever went there and stuff. And it's all modeled out, so it's not an argument that based on the fact that this CGI image um, matches this. You know what I mean? So
face of the moon.
we'll keep
And
going
guess
here.
what? The direction the moon is pointing even correlates with the observer's latitude. Isn't that something? Whether at the North Pole, South Pole, or anywhere in between, the orientation of the face of the moon that we all see will reveal your latitude on the spherical Earth. Pretty neat, huh?
Okay, so the moon and sun are in between the tropics, right? So if you're up here, if you're, um, in the northern hemisphere, you're looking south towards the moon, right? Or whatever. So the way that you'll see it, it won't be like inverted when you're outside of the northern hemisphere, right? If you're in the southern hemisphere, it's going to be flipped. And what he's talking about is how there's, that distortion based on how far away you are from the tropics. And, he's talking about the way he shows it on here is that it's a rotating moon, based off of a sphere or whatever the fuck. So this is nothing. So it's almost like the moon is like a compass guide for you, in the sky to tell, that helps tell you where you're at on the plane that you live on, and it also keeps track of the time and the months and stuff, days, like the moon calendar and shit, right? Now the 28-day cycle of the moon and all that, but he just misrepresents that and says that it's proof of the globe.
Of the face of the moon that we all see will reveal your latitude on the spherical Earth. Pretty neat, huh? Maybe one day you'll save up enough allowance that you can leave your mom's basement and see the moon from another part of the world. So, my precious little learners, do you now see how pathetically fragile the flat Earth delusion is? Of all the hundreds of individual isolated phenomena that rip it to shreds like it was made of paper mache, some of them don't.
So he had to misrepresent, what we're saying and then apply a bunch of things that we're not saying and then argue against it so he could dunk on it, you know. Like this, it's so stupid.
Don't even
He has no idea what the moon is. He's never even thought about it. People have told him his whole life that it's a rock in the sky that people walked on, and he believes it, you know. And that's it. That's all there is to his belief system.
require an ounce of scientific knowledge. They just require that you can think with your brain for 5 full seconds. For today's conclusive proof, we didn't have to talk about physics or astronomy or space travel. We didn't have to do any math. There were no equations for you to misunderstand or numbers for you to lie about. We just did a little bit of critical thinking. So now you can see.
So there was no numbers for us to lie about. There was no math involved. There was just critical thinking, right? There was no astronomy or anything like that. So he says all these things and talks down to us and misrepresents our arguments and then acts like, he defeated us and then talks about how we misrepresent math. Well, let's look at someone misrepresenting math real quick. So this is what he thinks we say about math.
Then, to justify this claim, you all say the same thing, typically with no context whatsoever. 8 inches per mile squared. None of you have any idea what this means. You can't derive it. You can't calculate anything with it. You can't make a prediction with it. You can't tell me anything about this value at all. When I point this.
So if the Earth is curved at a radius of 3959, it would have to, curve at a certain rate from anywhere you're standing on it, right? Because it's a ball. So that would be the rate of curvature for a ball with a radius of 3959. And it's extremely accurate and very generous to favor the globe curvature, which we'll get into here in a second. But let's listen to how he talks about, you know, this number and, the math involved.
Out to you, you get very angry, and instead of answering simple questions, you just link me to a bunch of videos made by con men. Well, I'm sorry, friends, those people are doing incorrect math, or lying, or both, and they are counting on the fact that you won't do any math at all to check up on them. 8 inches per mile squared is not a valid way to measure Earth's curvature. If you understood math, you would immediately see that this squared on miles is totally out of place. That's because this is a parabolic approximation. This is for doing calculations with a parabola. It's possible that you remember this shape from middle school algebra, but I wouldn't be surprised if you don't. As you can see, the Earth is not shaped like this. So where does it come from, and why do people use it? It comes from the Flat Earth Bible.
All right. I don't know nothing about no flat earth Bible. But anyway, real quick, this parabola that he made purposely doesn't fit the sphere that he's showing. So you could have a parabola that fits that sphere. He just made his not do it to illustrate his point. But yeah, so let's get into what all that means, right? So this is a video from I Can Science That. He's an actual professor who made a video comparing 8 inches per mile square versus 3 other ways that you could calculate the curvature of the Earth. And, you know, it's accurate. It's insanely accurate. So let's listen to him talk about it for a second.
Previous video, you know that I showed 4 different ways of calculating the drop with distance, depending on what you mean by distance. Let's take a closer look at this graph. The red line is the horizontal length method. My preferred method was the arc length, which is shown here in blue. Comparing that with the 8 inches per mile squared curve just above is remarkably close. The 8 inches per mile orange line lies between the extremes. Where is chord length on this graph? It's the green line.
Yeah, so the 8 inches per mile square is super accurate and it's, very generous for the globe. It's in between both extremes, as he said. Yeah, so up to 1,000 miles, it's only off by like 1 foot at 1,000 miles or something. Like it's not even sub 1,000 miles, like anything that we're talking, like, 30, 40 miles, 100 miles, couple 100 miles, super accurate within that. And this, and then he makes his whole video dogging us about how we're wrong and he's got the right way and blah, blah, blah. Like, all right, dude. And then his next point, water doesn't water doesn't, curve, it finds its own level, right? And then he shows water drops, dude, to illustrate his point. Do we live on a water drop, dude? Or do we live on a giant rock, right? That's spinning and then it has water that's sticking to it with no container. Like what like and this dude talks about how he doesn't like when people call out straw man and logic fallacies in his arguments. So, now you can kind of see why, because he doesn't actually refute anything flat earthers say, right? We're told all these presuppositions about the moon and how it works and all these things, right? And how it's tidally locked and how it can only be this one thing. Well, let's look at tidally locking, dude. How did we get tidally locked? Let's take it back to where the moon itself even came from, right? So this is a reputable official source, the BBC. Where did the moon come from? And we'll let this lady explain it.
Let me take you back to the earliest days of our planet, 4.5 billion years ago. At this time, the Earth had no moon. It was orbiting the sun alone, and it was being assaulted by rocks and comets.
Imagine I was going to explain to you how the Earth was flat, and I said, okay, so my evidence is 4 billion years ago, blah, 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 right? You would immediately be like, oh, this dude's full of it. How does he know what happened 4 billion years ago? But when these people say it, nobody questions it, right? Now, let's watch this trick unfold.
Today, there are no scars left from this cosmic pinball. But to get a sense of the damage that was done, I've come to the Arizona desert, to a great hole in the ground.
So to reaffirm her presupposition that the Earth is a sphere and that the moon came from a giant object hitting the Earth during its early formation, and then fragments of that collision um, kind of come together and form their own sphere that orbits the Earth. And this is all based on a giant hole in the ground. Okay. So we just went from CGI explanation to a hole in the ground. Well, let's see why we're here.
This is a beautiful crater, a near-perfect circle, a mile in diameter. It was formed when a meteor crashed into the Earth a mere 50,000 years ago. That's nothing on the timescale that we're talking about.
So the time scale that she's talking about, by the way, is reaffirmed by another time scale that we can't verify. And this crater is a perfect circle, right? So it would be it would have had to have hit the Earth at a 90-degree angle, coming straight down on it, leaving this perfect circle. And then there's nothing inside the crater. There's no asteroids, there's no giant rocks, there's no fragments. There's no fragments around the outside. There's no um perfect circle. Just it went in and it just hit the Earth so hard it just vaporized itself or something, right?
But it's amazing how much damage that one passing rock can cause. The early Earth was bombarded with rocks. It must have been mayhem. And then along came something much, much bigger. Another planet, the size of Mars, drifted into the path of Earth. It was on a collision course. It hit the Earth with a glancing blow. Imagine the power released by such a collision. The impact sent a mass of liquid rock into orbit. This debris coalesced into a ball. And the moon was formed.
So they show us all this stuff too as if everything's stationary out in space too. So kind of keep this in mind while they're showing this, right? So the sun is we're the Earth is chasing the sun at 66,000 miles an hour, and the sun is rotating or in the arm of the Milky Way that's rotating 1,000,000 miles an hour. The Milky Way galaxy itself is moving 1,000,000 miles an hour, and this object smashes into us, going, God knows how fast, right? And it it perfectly the resulting effect of this collision is that we're We maintain the perfect distance and speed to orbit the sun and then rotate ourselves at 1,000 miles an hour. As an object that was created from the collision, maintains speed and catches up with us, and not only that, but forms an orbit around us. As it spins, uh, as it counter spins to our rotation at 10.5 miles an hour, making it in such a way that we only see the same side of it. That's why they say it's tidally locked, right? Uh, it's actually, they say it's rotating at 10.5 miles an hour counter rotation to the Earth. And then it gives the appearance that it's tidally locked, and that's why we see the same side of it. So all of this out of a random collision, and all these speeds and craziness, and it produces an object that happens to be 400 times further away from the sun, which happens to be 400, and the sun itself happens to be 400 times bigger than the object that passes uh, in the sky from our position on the object that the moon was created from. And it all happens to line up perfectly in such a way that we see that during an eclipse, we see two objects that are the exact same size block each other out. That's what they tell us is happening. And this is all backed up by a guy calling us stupid and arguing things that we don't argue, right? Whatever's going on in the sky is beyond the physicality that has been attributed to it by so-called science and mathematics. Um, so then he goes on. Well, let's just let him
How
finish
people
his
figured
thoughts
out that
here.
the Earth is round thousands of years ago before science even existed because they weren't stupid. They had access to basic logic and were able to comprehend simple proofs like this one, of which there are dozens. Just like you, they didn't know anything about gravity or forces or cosmology. And just like you, they had no idea what the moon is or what the sun is or what the stars are. And they figured it out all the same because they didn't have to know what these objects are. They just had fully functional brains.
There's no way to tell if the lights in the sky are spheres or not. So the fact that he presents it this way should be kind of revealing because it's not. And all the ancient cosmologies are basically the Earth is a level plane with a dome over top of it, and there's like whatever goes on in the heavens is going on outside of that. So if you look at Norse mythology, sorry, North cosmology, so you'll see they live on a flat plane, magnetic center, uh, dome over top, that sort of thing, right? So and they all knew we lived in a closed system and stuff like that. But in our systems, because we're the smart ones, we figured out that it's actually not a closed system, that it's actually not a that it's a pressurized system next to uh an extremely low pressurized system with no barrier. That's what we figured out. So he talks about these ancient peoples and all these things, right? So this is how eclipses are predicted. And this was something Karen B presented. I'll have a link to her video in the description. But all the eclipses are predicted by a guy named Fred Espernak, and he calculates these based on data sets where people just recorded the patterns in the sky. Because if you record eclipses over a 19-year period, you'll realize that it's a resetting cycle every 19 years. So without knowing that anything's a sphere or anything like that, they were able to calculate and predict eclipses. Now we're able to predict them so well now because we have such a large data set to pull from. So it's, more accurate and that sort of things. And you could apply more complex mathematics to it. But it's not because that the Earth's a globe or anything like that, right? Like these are just observational things. Now they're presented as if it's proof of anything. So we just watched this lady talk about these craters and all this stuff, and we'll just wrap this up real quick. So back to what these craters could possibly be. So this is a giant crater. These are what they could possibly be.
In the geyser, that's where the water comes up at. Same thing here.
This is Flat Out Truth with Terry R. Eicher. Check out his channel. He makes original content, has his own ideas, you know, has his own interpretation of things, and you know, posts a lot of interesting stuff. So see what his thoughts are on what made this, right?
As you can see here, there's a runoff on the meteor crater and a runoff on the geyser. Now look at here, right in the middle, you see where the geyser actually comes up. You can see it in the meteor crater and the geyser. That's where the water comes up at. Same thing here. Everything around it is just where the water pressure coming up explodes everything outward. And here, if you look to the right of the crater and the right of the geyser, they're shaped identical. That's water pressure, not a meteorite. It's simply the original geysers that God opened up and flooded the earth with. People, common sense. All you got to do is look at it. Now, you notice here in this meteor crater how the earth has upturned edge around the circle of the crater. Now, here's how that happens. Here is a photo of a geyser actually fixing to erupt. Notice how it upturns the edge of the hole around it. Now, once again, if we look in Genesis 7:11.
All right. And then he goes on to attribute this to, you know, biblical cosmology where they say there was the flooding and all that. So he's saying that, you know, the water could have come out of these giant geysers, and that's what that was from. So that's definite possibility that these were geysers, you know, previously. And you know, or they could be like if you took a bomb, buried it, and exploded it, you know, you could probably get something like this. So I think a big revealing fact is that in all of these alleged craters, they're all perfect circles, implying a 90-degree impact. You know, what are the odds that meteors just keep hitting at 90 degrees? You know, wherever these craters are, and it just doesn't have to be what they say it is, right? Because there's nothing inside of it. There's no indication that that an object from outside of where we live, you know, came down and hit us, you know. So there's that. Eclipses. I think we pretty much covered everything. So this was a quick video on scale invariance. So if you want to see, if you're interested in learning about how they come up with the so-called measurements of these things, right? It's all based on angular resolution. And once they make certain assumptions about where we live and what's going on in the sky, they can come up with a whole system of distances and sizes and masses and weights and stuff. And this kind of explains that. So let me just play a minute of this.
Scaling invariance. Feel free to look it up on Wikipedia, and you'll see that in physics, mathematics, statistics, and economics, scale invariance is a feature of objects or laws that do not change if scales of length, energy, or other variables are multiplied by a common factor. As long as all of your inputs are scaled correctly, the entire body is indifferent. It doesn't vary. One of those things, the entire solar system model. But wait.
All right, so if you scale everything by a common factor, everything will just happen to work out. So let's see what that would look like in practice.
Their orbits, sizes, and distance would all be scaled appropriately. Here's an easy way to see it in action. Take these numbers 0, 3, 6, and start doubling. 12, 24, 56, 108. Okay, now add 4 to each. So 0 becomes 4, 3 becomes 7, 6 becomes 10, 12 becomes 16, 24 becomes 28, 56 becomes 60, and 108 becomes 112. Now divide by 10. So 4 becomes 0.4, 7 becomes 0.7, 10 becomes 1.0, 16 becomes 1.6, 28 becomes 2.8, 60 becomes 6.0, and 111 or 112 becomes 11.2. Now, does that look familiar? Well, it should. 0.4 is Mercury's AU, 0.7 is Venus, 1.0 is Earth, 1.6 is Mars, 2.8 is Ceres, 6.0 is Jupiter, and 11.2 is Saturn. Now, of course, those are approximate numbers as they change based on their distance from the sun, which is changing all the time. So now you have the distances from the sun, 93 million miles times the AU, so Mercury is 37.2 million, Venus is 65.1 million, Earth is 93 million, Mars is 148.8 million, Jupiter is 558 million, and Saturn's about a billion. Of course, you can then figure out exactly what their distance from Earth is, with Mercury being 56 million, Venus being 26 million, Mars being 34 million, and Jupiter being 367 million miles from Earth. But what if 1 AU is actually 3,567 miles, not 93 million? Well, 3,567 is to 93 million as 1 is to 26,072. So scale it all by 1 26,072nd, or I'm not really sure. Then you can even figure out the distance from the Earth. So Mercury is 2,147 miles, Venus is 997, Mars is 1,304, all miles from Earth. Now wait, wouldn't they need to be smaller? And, well, of course, scaling and variance. So Mercury is actually 2,147 miles away, and with its angular size, it would come out to 0.11 miles, so that would be 603 feet in diameter. And Venus at 997 miles from Earth would have a 0.28 mile diameter, or 1,520 feet. And Jupiter would be 14,076 miles away and 3.40 miles wide. And we can check our work as well, because
So as you can see there, you could just make the numbers whatever you want once you come up with a system for it, right? So just because they come up with a story with math doesn't mean that anything they say about what goes on in the sky is true. And with that, I think I'll close. I think, did I let Dave finish his video? Oh, we'll play the rest of Dave's video real quick.
And a basic capacity for spatial reasoning. So before you go and spew some emoji-laden nonsense in the comments section, take a moment to reflect and admit to yourself that what we went over here today is irrefutable. There is no way around it. Your usual whinings of conspiracy and CGI have no place here. There is no science for you to blatantly deny. It's just basic logic that even a toddler could understand. If you can't
Oh man,
can't wrap your head around this, there truly is no hope for you. So take a deep breath, let the facts in, and push the delusion out. Have a nice day.
All right, so in quick recap here, there's no CGI for us to talk about. Well,
Face always
except for this, and except for this whole situation is based on another CGI presentation. Uh, you know, right here. So there's that, and what was the other thing?
Science for you to blatantly deny. It's just basic logic that even a toddler could understand. If you
So basic logic that a toddler can understand. Well, he used all logic fallacies to, quote unquote, make his scientific point. So he didn't do any science at all, or make any points at all, or argue anything at all, or prove anything at all. He didn't. The only thing he said is that if you take a physical object and put it over a flat disk, it wouldn't be the same as what we see now. And that's true, but it's also not what we say at all. So there's this video is just nothing. It's literally nothing. So yeah. That's why you should never put your faith in just something some guy says, man. Always look into this stuff on your own. And even things that flat earthers tell you. Like, don't believe anything that I told you just because I said it. Go look into it for yourself and put the work in and see if you want to subscribe to this cosmology. Like, see if you can find the actual reasons uh, that the moon is what they say it is and it came from what they said it is. And don't just believe this guy who talks about emojis, dude. You know who used a lot of emojis? This dude. This, this emoji laden nonsense. This dude, this dude just uses emojis, So I don't know, man. What is the moon? Who is the moon? These are all questions we're trying to find out ourselves. Ancient people told stories about the celestial bodies and attributed aspects of nature to them. When in modern times we look at the stars, we say, "Oh, that's a ball of gas that's in a low pressure system that decided to all clump together and then form an atmosphere to contain itself within the low pressure system, and then which would create a high pressure system in that low pressure system with no container other than the fact that the mass of the object that attracted all the gas is the contain. Like, you see how crazy and circular all this gets, but they have to say these things are this way because they have to take away the significance of the sky clock. The sky is put out there for us to know where we're at. And that's been obfuscated and presented in a way to back up a model that has been, like presupposed and then reverse engineered with math and theories to back it up. And when you try and talk about it, you get this guy who only makes up things about what you claim, you know, and he uses, for a guy that doesn't like
Or today's
emojis,
conclusion, ripping
dude,
to shreds like we didn't
sure
have to do it.
uses a lot of emojis. So take care and do your own research and good luck on your journey, man.